Do you know that heat that rises by the spine, but is not that of shame? Is it danger? So it is. I, Renata, 40, thought I had already felt everything in this life, but I was about to discover a completely new kind of shiver. It was any Thursday. The day had been hell at work, and all I wanted most was a long bath and put on my black lace lingerie. Not to impress anyone, it was for me, to feel powerful and owner of my skin, even if it was to put an old pajama on top. I was there, in my sanctuary, in my room, looking at me in the mirror, straightening a handle, and that's when the door of my room opened. Of suddenly, without crashing, and there he was, Daniel, my nephew. But the 19-year-old boy I saw stopped at the door was no longer a boy. He was a man-made. Hey. And his eyes did not divert by education. Were dug into me, traveling every inch of the lace, every piece of exposed skin. The world stopped for 2 seconds that lasted a lifetime. He stammered, "Hey, it was bad aunt," and closed the door. But the damage, or rather the fire, had already started. The problem was not he saw me. The problem is that I saw in his eyes he liked. And a lot. What would you do in my place? Comment down here and already subscribe to the channel. When the bedroom door closed, the sound of the latch was like a shot in silence. Paralyzed, feeling the lingerie fabric on my skin in a different way, as if suddenly on a stage under a spotlight. My heart hammered my ribs, a mixture of adrenaline, shame, and something more, something I didn't want to name. It was a violation, of course, but a violation that had left a strange brand in the air. I tried to rationalize the situation. He was a boy, didn't see it bad, it was an accident. I forced my brain to repeat these phrases like a mantra as I rushed to put on my pajamas. But the image of his eyes didn't come out of my head. It was not a look of fright or excuses. It was a look of discovery. It looked that undressed me again, even with the door already closed. That night, the corridor of my house, a new geography. Each step outside my room made me tense. I knew he was in the next room. The proximity that was once familiar and comforting was now carried a weird and unwanted electricity. The silence between us was not peace. It was a silence that shouted what had happened minutes before. I lay down, but sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, feeling a complete idiot. I was 40 years old. I was the aunt, the adult of the relationship. He should have shouted, scolded, had established the order. But I did nothing. I just got there, and my inertia was the first piece of a dangerous game that I didn't even know I was already playing. The following days were marked by a subtle but undeniable change. The Daniel I knew, that half-wide nephew who only talked about games in college, began to disappear. In his place, a more attentive, more observant version came up. He noticed things that were once invisible to him. It started with little things. He offered me help to get the car out of the car, something he never did. He started to pull the chair so I sit at the dinner table. I praised my perfume or a new haircut. For anyone else, especially for my sister, his mother, was a welcome transformation. The boy was finally becoming a gentleman. Only I knew the truth. I felt the motivation behind each gesture. It was not a genuine maturation. It was a strategy. Every kindness was accompanied by a look that took a second more. Each compliment had a subtext, a veiled insinuation that left me with goosebumps. The boy I helped create, which I saw grow, was using a man's tools to study. He was testing me, measuring my reactions with every calculated movement. And the worst part was silence. He never touched the bedroom subject, and this absence of conversation turned the incident into a secret of ours. An intimacy that it seemed to cultivate with pleasure. The tension climbed scary. What started with time-consuming looks evolved into constant and bold surveillance. It was as if, after seeing me in lingerie, he felt the right to imagine myself that way at all times. And he made a point of knowing that. We were in the room watching a movie with the family. I was in sweatshirt, completely covered. But when I crossed my legs, I felt his eyes following me. When I leaned down to pick up the popcorn, I saw the fixed gaze on my eye. He was not discreet. Was a provocation, a silent challenge, to see how far I could handle it. The worst time was during a Sunday lunch. I was in the kitchen, my back, washing the dishes. Suddenly, I felt that presence behind me. He said he just wanted a glass of water, but stood there too close. I could feel the warmth of his body on my back. He didn't touch me, but his proximity was as invasive as a touch. I turned, ready to send him out, and ran into that smile. A smile of corner of my mouth, full of second intentions. He looked down to my mouth, and then climbed his eyes to mine. Slowly, at that moment, in the kitchen of my own house with my sister in the next room, I felt completely naked. He was stripping me with his eyes, and a part of him seemed to delight in my discomfort. The situation reached its boiling point on a Tuesday night. My sister had left, and we were only both of us at home. I tried to lock myself in the room, use work as an excuse, but needed to drink water. I went to the kitchen on my foot, hoping that he was sleeping or distracted with some game. It was a fatal calculation error. He was there waiting for me in the dark, like a predator. As soon as I entered, he lit the weak light on the counter, and I saw him. He wasn't with his usual boy face. His expression was serious, determined. He blocked me the passage, placing his hand on the wall beside my head. My heart fired, fear finally becoming real and palpable. "Aunt, we need to talk," he said, the most serious voice than usual. I tried to dodge, said it was late that we talked the next day, but he didn't move. He got closer, his smell of male scent filling the air. Around me, choking me. "I can no longer pretend," he continued, looking deep into my eyes. And then he released the bomb. "It wasn't an accident that day. I wanted to see you. I always looked at you in a different way. I was airless," his words hitting me like stones. Before I could sue, he completed, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't want girls my age anymore. Renata, it's you I always wanted. A woman like you." He didn't say aunt, he said Renata. And at that moment, the last barrier of respect was broken. My first reaction was the pure shock. His words echoed in the silent cuisine, mingling with the frantic beat of my heart. "A woman like you." The phrase disgusted me, and for a thousandth of a second scared me with the power she contained. He saw me no longer as his aunt. He saw me like a target, an object of desire. My blood fell and boiled at the same time. His hand was still on the wall, cornering me. I looked at his face, to the certainty he displayed, and a huge anger went up his throat. My hand tingled with the desire to slap his face, to mark the audacity and disrespect there. To put him back in his nephew place, almost a son. But I didn't do it. Instead of a slap, what came out of me was a trembling no and weak. "Daniel, you go crazy. I'm your aunt." My voice didn't have the firmness I wanted. It had a tone of panic, of supplication, and I hated myself for that. I should have been the wall, the fortress. Instead, I was a sandy castle crumbling. He backed down a step, not for my no, but maybe for the panic in my eyes. He seemed to realize that he had gone too far, too fast. I enjoyed the breach, diverted from him, and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. Leaning against Madeira, panting, I could only think of one thing: the slap I didn't give. That contained blow would be the ghost that would haunt me, the symbol of my failure to cut evil from the root. Locked in my room, the silence was my only companion. I went to the mirror, the same mirror in front of which it all started. But the woman who stared at me back wasn't the same as days ago. The powerful woman, owner of herself, who wore lingerie to please herself, was gone. In her place, there was a scared figure, her eyes wide and her mouth. Who was that woman? It was Renata the aunt. It was Renata the adult. But was it also the woman who, for a fleeting moment, felt flattered by her attention? The question was ugly, poisonous, and I didn't want to answer her. But she was there, floating in the air. His confession, however wrong and unhealthy, had aroused something. I do not wish, but an awareness of my own dormant femininity. I felt dirty. Dirty for his confession, but also for my own confusion. Why don't I react more strongly? Why was a part of me paralyzed instead of exploding in fury? The guilt began to settle in. I passed on every interaction, every look I ignored, every smile that I may have returned without thinking. Had I somehow given a rope? The image in the mirror became my judge. I saw my expression wrinkles, my 40th, and questioned me. Was I so needy with attention to the point of leaving such a situation to come to this extreme? It was not just his fault, I started thinking. was my fault for not having imposed respect due from the first second. I was not a passive victim. I was a silent participant in the erosion of our limits. After that night, the house turned. Air became heavy, dense, almost breathable. Each corridor, every shared room became a minute emotional field. The silence that settled between us was different from the previous one. It was no longer a silence of secret. It was a cold silence of war. An abyss had opened between us. I avoided him as if he were a disease. I changed my breakfast time waiting for him to get in the shower so I could use the kitchen, and spent the nights locked in my room with the accumulated job. Living in the same house has become an exercise in logistics and strategy to avoid any kind of meeting. He, in turn, seemed to break the rejection. His gaze was no longer of desire. It was resentful. There was a bitterness, a contained anger that was almost scarier. He hit his doors harder, left the headphones at the maximum volume, passive-aggressive attitudes of an opposite boy. But from the man who had declared himself to me, the house, which has always been my refuge, my safe haven, became a prison. I felt a stranger on my own home, walking on my feet, constantly on alert. Peace had been stolen. Each sound, every step in the hall, made me on a state of alert. The danger was no longer just in his eyes, but in the atmosphere we created together. A toxic mixture of rejected desire and growing guilt. The fire test came the following Saturday. My sister, oblivious to everything, decided to make a special dinner. To celebrate the family, she said. To me, he sounded like a sentence. The idea of sitting at the same table pretending to normal caused me nausea. But I couldn't refuse. Refusing would raise suspicions that I was not prepared to face. Dinner was a play. The three of us sitting, the smell of good food in the air, and a forced conversation about banalities. My sister talked about work, about the plans for the weekend. I responded with monosyllables, smiling mechanically, feeling. The muscles of my face hurt with the effort. Daniel was quiet than normal, but the game continued, only in a more subtle and perverse way. Under the table, far from the eyes of his mother, the war happened. He stretched his leg and touched my foot with his. It was a quick, almost accidental touch, but we both knew it wasn't. I immediately removed my foot as if it had touched on fire. My whole body was rigid. Minutes later, he dropped the fork on purpose. As he bent down to catch, his hand deliberately brushed on my leg. Was a forbidden electrical contact that made me hold my breath. I looked at him, who gave me a quick look, a mix of challenge and complicity. There, at that dining table, with my sister among us, I understood. The game was not over. He had only changed board. Mothers have a sixth sense, a radar that captures frequencies that we mere mortals could not. And my sister's radar, Paula, began to whistle. She was an observant, and despite my acting worthy of an Oscar, she began to feel that the dynamics of the house had changed dramatically. She didn't understand what she was, but she felt the tension. She saw how I cringed when Daniel entered the same room. I noticed how he barely looked in my face, answering my questions with a veiled hostility that was not characteristic of him. The joy and complicity that always existed between aunt and nephew had evaporated, giving way to a heavy mood. One day she took me by surprise in the kitchen. "Renata," she began, with that tone of who goes straight to the point. "Did you fight, you and Daniel?" The question was like a punch in the stomach. I denied it too fast, laughed nervously, and said it was just her impression that he was in those stages of teenagers. But my answer did not convince her. I saw in her eyes the seed of doubt being planted. "I don't know, there's something strange. You barely talk. It looks like there's a ghost living between you both." She couldn't be right. There was a ghost, the ghost of a confession made in the dim light of the kitchen, and he was haunting us all. Even though only me and Daniel knew his name, Paula's distrust culminated in a direct confrontation. It was on a rainy night, which made the scenario even more dramatic. Daniel had left, and she called me to talk to the room. He turned off the television, sat in front of me, and crossed his arms. His face did not have the usual light expression. It was the face of a worried mother and a suspicious sister. "I won't go around, Renata. Know you're hiding something," she said, her voice firm. "Something serious happened between you and my son. I want the truth." Now, her ultimatum stopped in the air. My brain panicked, looking for escape routes, excuses, plausible lies. But she didn't give me time. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on mine. and asked the question I feared the most in the world. The question that turned my fear into pure dread. Did he do something to you? He disrespected you. Her tone was a mixture of maternal protection and fear. She was imagining scenarios, and I knew the truth was a scenario she could never conceive. And then came the final blow. Whatever it is, I need to know. Tell me, Renata, what's up between you? My blood froze. The direct question, what is among you, implied a possibility of double connivance. A shared secret at that moment. I was not just protecting Daniel from his mother. I was protecting myself from an accusation that, in my heart, I feared being partially true. Given that question, I had two options. The first was the truth. Tell us everything from the lingerie incident to confession in the kitchen. This would implode our family. I would destroy the image my sister had from her son, and possibly her relationship with me, forever. It would be an atomic bomb of honesty. The second option was to lie. I chose the second. I took a deep breath, forced an expression of offense and tiredness, and built the most convincing lie of my life. He said the tension was because of money. I invented that I had loaned Daniel for something from college, that he had spent on something else and was now avoiding it, for shame, and charged him. It was a plausible lie that explained the strangeness and silence without touching the royal wound. Paula frowned, processing the information. The lie involved a normal mistake of a young man, something a mother could understand and rebuke. It was much more palatable than the monstrous truth I hid. She looked relieved, though still disappointed with her son. He has no way. I'm going to have a serious conversation with him, she said. At that moment, I felt immense relief. The pressure had declined. The suspicion had been diverted. But as soon as she left the room, the relief gave way to a wave of nausea. The lie I told to protect everyone was not white. It was a selfish lie. A lie that saved me but made a black and permanent spot in my conscience. The following days were a particular hell. On the outside, the storm had passed. Paula had this serious talk with Daniel about the non-existent debt. He, confused but intelligent enough to understand that I had created an escape route for both of us, simply agreed and apologized to his mother. Normality, a false and hollow version of her, was restored in the house. But inside, I was in ruins. The guilt consumed me. Each time my sister looked at me gratefully for me, told the truth, I felt a twinge my chest. Every time I saw Daniel, I didn't only see the nephew I wanted me, but also my accomplice in a complex and dirty scam. We were both united by that secret. And now, also for that lie. Fear didn't disappear either. He just changed shape. Before, I feared his next onslaught. Now I feared the lie crumbly. I lived with the constant dread that one of us said the wrong word, that an inconsistency appeared, and the whole castle of letters came below. I became a prisoner of my own trap. I ate bad. I slept even worse. I swallowed the blame along with breakfast and fear along with dinner. I had sacrificed the truth to maintain peace, but I found that peace built on a lie is more distressing than any open conflict. The tranquility of my house was priced, and I was paying with my own soul. I couldn't live that way anymore. The fault was eroding me, and the silent tension with Daniel was unsustainable. I needed an end point. Not one that was based on lies to others, but one that was based on the truth between us. I needed to draw a definitive line in the sand. I waited for a moment when we were alone again. This time, I was looking for him. I knocked on his bedroom door, a complete reversal of the initial situation. When he opened, his expression was surprised. Without asking license, I entered and closed the door behind me. I needed privacy for what I was about to say. "Nuff, Daniel," I said, and this time my voice came out firm, cold, with all the authority I should have used from the beginning. I didn't give him room to talk. "What happened? The things you said? The games? Everything? It ends here. 'Tis now. There will be no more looks, no accidental touches, no secrets." I looked straight into his eyes, forcing him to face the consequence of his actions. "I lied to your mother to protect you, to protect me, to protect this family. But this protection is over today. From now on, we are aunt and nephew. Just that. If you cross this border again, anyway, I swear I tell her the whole truth, no matter how ugly it is." It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. My firmness took him by surprise. He was silent for a long time, just looking at me. For the first time, I did not see desire or resentment in your eyes. I saw the understanding. He finally understood that the game was over and that he had lost. The fantasy he built in his mind collided with the reality wall that I lifted in front of him. He didn't apologize. Maybe your pride was too big for that. But he slowly shook his head, a gesture of agreement. "Okay, Aunt," he said. The word aunt came out with a different weight. It was no longer a formalism. It was the recognition of the border that I had just reinforced with concrete. It was the end. On the following days, a new dynamic settled. A dynamic of forced respect. He kept the distance. His eyes didn't look for me anymore. He was polite but cold. Ancient hostility was replaced by calculated indifference. It was uncomfortable, but it was 1,000 times better than before. The dangerous game had really come to an end. There were no more provocations. There were no secrets whispered by the air. Only the protocol coexistence between an aunt and a nephew who shared a recent past that they both preferred to forget. Peace was not warm or happy, but it was peace. And at that moment, it was all I needed to breathe again. Even with the end of the game, the wound left a scar. Living under the same ceiling has never been the same. The innocence that one day defined our family relationship was permanently stained. The space between us was now filled with non-spoken words, and a memory that they both struggled to suppress. The coexistence became an act of continuous performance. In family dinners, we talked about trivial matters, avoiding any theme that could remotely lead us to dangerous terrain. Paula, my sister, noticed the restored peace and assumed that such fictional debt had been resolved. Little did she know that peace was only the absence of war, not the presence of harmony. There were strange moments. An accidental encounter in the corridor in the middle of the night, a moment when our hands brushed to the same object. In these moments, a spark of the old tension returned, and we both regained quickly, as if we had a shock. It was a constant reminder of what happened. I learned to live with this ghost. I learned to navigate this new, uncomfortable reality. The house was no longer the same, and our family either. Everything seemed a little more fragile, a little less real. The question that was in the air every day was, how do you rebuild the confidence where one day there was such a deep break? The answer, I feared, was that perhaps never completely rebuilt. Looking back for all this crazy story, I wonder what the great lesson is. The easy conclusion would be to blame a boy for his hormones or a woman for his supposed need. But the truth is much more complex and uncomfortable. This experience taught me more about myself than I would like to admit. The forbidden is a test. He does not create our demons, only illuminates them. The situation with Daniel forced me to face my own insecurities, my need for validation, and, above all, my difficulty in setting firm boundaries when the situation is emotionally complicated. I failed in the first test, and that flaw almost cost the peace of my family. This story taught me that the adult's responsibility in any relationship is non-negotiable. It was my duty to have cut evil in the first look, in the first insinuation. Inertia is often a form of permission. Leaving a doorway to the danger is the same as inviting it to enter. In the end, what remains is forced maturity, both for me and for him. It is the memory of a dangerous limit that has been crossed, and the harsh lesson that some borders exist for a reason. The forbidden test, yes. But the real strength is not to flirt with him, but to have the clarity and the courage to build a very loud wall as he approaches. And this is a lesson that I will lead to the rest of my life.